So I wanted to make a video about how strawberry propaganda came about. I know a lot of people, when they first hear the name strawberry propaganda, might giggle a little bit or think, oh, how silly or something like that. But there's a really important undercurrent that I'm riding through all of this. And you might have seen a lot of my postings or any of my art or anything like that. And you know that I've declared myself to be an artist who focuses on love and the human experience. And that is because I went through a very hard period where I wasn't experiencing love. I didn't know what love was. And I made a commitment to myself 10 years ago to discover what love is. And so all of these things that I've put out are not me saying definitively, like, this is what love is. It's an exploration of the process. I'm just trying to get closer and closer to this concept, this idea, and relating that out into the world brings me great joy because it allows me to process these things that I've been through and share with others in a way that other people then are sharing with me their difficulties and their explorations. And the more that we can share and move that energy back and forth, the more that we're going to discover who we are as humans, as a humanity. So we operate individually. However, the way that we each individually operate makes up the whole. At this point, I don't have shame about any of this. I'm very grateful for the experiences that I've received and gone through. It's all just knowledge. We learn things by going through the experience, and what turns it from knowledge into wisdom is sharing what we've learned through that process. I'm a stubborn person, but all of that is just to say, these are very real experiences, and flipping it around for you, for anyone who might need to hear some of these words or who might have had similar experiences or who have had no similar experiences but are just kind of curious, like what other people have experienced in the world. Okay, so let's get into the story. So I do want to throw in a little trigger warning for violence and relationships. I will also say that throughout this time when I was struggling through making these decisions, there were a lot of people who would come up to me randomly on the street and say, I've seen the way that you all are interacting, and I'm really concerned for your safety. Oftentimes I would brush that aside because they were people I didn't know. They were strangers, whereas the people who were closest to me were the people who were saying, yeah, you just got to stick it out. You just got to make things work. Sometimes you got to make compromises or sacrifices. So I dated a guy all through my 20s. We dated for about 7 years. And we got married in 2013. He was in the military, and I was not interested in a military wedding. I wasn't interested in being a military bride. So he proposed by slipping a ring on my finger while I was sleeping, and he never officially asked me to marry him. I woke up in the middle of the night thinking, well, I guess I'm getting married. Logically, I was trying to understand what my body was feeling, but at the same time, I was terrified of my body and how it made me feel. And so there was a lot of this like back and forth within myself, which then presented itself in the relationships that I had. In this marriage that I had, there was a lot of that back and forth. For context, it was not necessarily the relationship, but it was also my own experiences that I had received before being in this relationship. And I didn't understand the complexities that come from those kinds of experiences when you are so young. And the messaging that I was receiving over and over and over was, as a victim, what did you do to make this happen? He took a lot of these victim perpetrator kinds of roles and use them against me, not necessarily because he knew that he was doing that, but more than likely because this is the stigma of society, and he bought into the fact that I was broken, and he turned that around to make sure that I felt that I became grateful to him, and I had to rely on him because I was such a broken being. And I really sunk into this numbness without realizing that I was doing that, right? Because we're very drawn to each other, but it was like an attachment. I think, now looking back, more so than like a love. And there were a lot of things that he told me that the way that he spoke it to me, he would tell me that, the only reason why someone would want to talk to me is because they found me attractive and they wanted to go further, right? So there were a lot of things that I soaked into my being, and I believed, and I didn't have the self-confidence. I didn't have the strength in a lot of ways to look outside and find joy. And so I just decided, well, this is what people do. This is life. People grow up, they get married, and then they have children, and like, this is just how my life is going to be. And so I just kind of accepted it at that point. And, then there was like sort of this other side of myself, that I've always been a creative being. I've always painted. I've always imagined worlds and realities, and I didn't know quite how to get it out. And so I just kind of kept it within my family, within that relationship. I was getting these messages of, you're never going to make it as an artist. You're never going to make money. You just need to quit this silly thing. Nobody else in your world is doing these things. So why are you making life difficult for yourself? And so these were the messages that were in my head. These were the voices that were telling me, like, you can't succeed. But then there was this other side of me deeper down that I didn't fully understand yet, that was kind of like trying to break out. I was trying to be who I was around people who were trying to limit who I was. So within all of this, I was out in California, and I finally got married. And at that point, my husband decided that I needed a better job. And so he thought that I would be a really hot yoga instructor. So he offered to pay my full tuition for me to go to a yoga teacher training program. And in a funny jokes on him kind of a way, it really opened and expanded my mind, and it started changing some of my beliefs. I started feeling my body, and there were things that started coming up, and I was like, I don't know what this is. It's like this strong feeling, but I've never actually sat and welcomed it and thought about what this is. And so one day I went to my yoga teacher and I explained this feeling that I had, and he looked at me and he said, "That's shame. That's shame." And I hadn't ever heard that before, and I didn't know what that meant. And so he connected me with a therapist. My first session, I said, I have the perfect life. My husband is incredible. I have a very loving family. There's just something wrong with me, and I don't know what it is. My second session, I said, my life is in shambles. I don't know what to do. And then I spent the next year delving into that, just trying to figure out, why is my life in shambles? And on my 28th birthday, it was the beginning of 2014, I was almost done with my teacher training program, and I had started to kind of stand up for myself. I had started taking time for myself. I had started to meditate every morning. I had started to carve out times in my day where I could just be with myself and feel my body, feel my feelings. And that had become very uncomfortable for my husband. It was like the night before I turned 28. He just made a really snide comment when we were falling asleep, and he was like, you just don't seem like yourself these days. And I was like, that's so strange, because I actually feel really connected to myself more than I ever have before. It was like yelling back and forth. In the midst of that, I felt this calmness. And it was that calmness that it was like a whisper. And I just said, I don't deserve this. And he got real quiet and he looked at me and he said, what did you say? And I said, I don't want to be married to somebody who's treating me like this. And without a word, he turned around, he went to the kitchen, and he grabbed a knife. And I tried talking to him. I tried so many different things, and I don't remember how the night ended, but I do remember that he threw that knife at me, and it stuck in the wall behind me. If he wanted to kill me, he could. And I decided I didn't want to die. I decided I wanted to live. I wanted to continue on this path of learning who I was. And so the next day, I went to a yoga class. And I was a mess, of course, and it was my birthday. So people were coming up to me and giving me hugs and saying happy birthday. And I just could not contain myself. I just burst into tears. And my teacher knew that there was something really wrong. And I have so much gratitude for her, because in that moment, she pulled me into her office and she looked me in the eye and she said, don't go home. She said, find somewhere else to go. She's like, if you have a friend with a couch anywhere, she was like, don't go home tonight. And I listened. It was one of those times when I couldn't make my own choice. And so here was somebody who was telling me with love, what to do. And so I listened. And I called my mom, and my mom hopped on a plane the next day, and she rented a hotel room. And that was the beginning of me leaving. It takes a while to leave somebody. And so I will be honest, I did go back and I did try to make things work. And it was clear by April that that was not going to happen. I'm going to skip around a little bit because simultaneously, I was living a double life in a lot of ways. So I was going to these yoga classes, I was doing this spiritual thing. And then after I left class, my body would be like, that felt too good. I need to sabotage myself a little bit. It would come out in ways that I didn't fully understand, right? And so I ended up getting a DUI. And I hadn't even been drinking. I would probably drink less that night than I ever drank. So I actually probably had one of the cheapest DUIs. I didn't have a stable living situation. I was subletting from people. I was moving to a different location. I was in between jobs. So I was able to claim homelessness. I claimed no income. I was just in total transition phase. And I went to court and I just broke down every time because life was so hard in this moment. I used this as an opportunity to take a step back and to really do some deep inner dives with myself. And I ended up having a lot of really amazing conversations with other people who were struggling through addictions in many capacities. So then, because I didn't have a license and I wasn't allowed to drive my car, I was trying to get this divorce. I didn't need him to sign the papers, but I had to prove that they were delivered. I couldn't afford, the delivery service, and none of my friends felt comfortable doing it. So there was one girl who agreed to do it. On this journey to go drop off these divorce papers, I got pulled over. And of course they ran my license and they were like, you're not supposed to be operating a motor vehicle. So they impounded my car. And this part of LA was prostitute row. So I was put into a jail cell with a lot of prostitutes. It was Memorial Weekend. So this was in May. I was wearing a tiny little outfit because it was very hot. So they, threw me in handcuffs, took me to jail. And I was very stubborn in this logic of mine, where I was like, I don't deserve this. I was actually doing the right thing. And then I was like, you all are the ones who are messed up. And, so I fought them the whole way. When they locked me in with all these other women, I got really small. And I just picked the bunk bed that was all the way back in the corner. And I just curled up in a corner. And they have to hold you for a certain amount of time. So I was there until midnight. I was there for 6 hours. And I just curled up in the corner and I just sat there and I just witnessed. And I just meditated. It was the only thing I knew how to do. And it was crazy, let me tell you. It was such an eye-opener for me, being around a whole lot of women who catered to other people's desires. It really made me think and really gave me a lot of compassion for all women, really, but also for myself. At one point, one of the girls hollered up to me and she's like, "Hey, white girl, what you doing here? What you in for?" And I was a little, sheepish because I knew it was there was no reason for me to be there, really. And I was like, "Oh, I had a DUI, and so I was driving without a license." She just laughed. She laughed at me. She's like, "Girl," she's like, "you better get your shit together. You don't belong in here." And she was so right. She was so right. They let me out of jail. I didn't have money. I didn't have a place to go. I was 10 miles away from my house. It was midnight. I will spare you the details, but I will tell you that night was a really scary night for me. And I am grateful that I survived that night, because I think that if circumstances had been different, or if I had not been self-aware, there was ample opportunity for me to be taken. Got the divorce papers to him. I signed my part. I paid my part. So flash forward a little bit throughout this year, a couple months later, I'd moved to the West Side. I got a job in Santa Monica in this nice little neighborhood. And I was 2 miles from the beach. It was really great. Soon after I got my driver's license back, my car was totaled. So I was driving down the highway I was coming back from a meeting for what ended up being my last feature film that I worked on. And I was moving from one highway, and then I was entering the other highway. And right as I was entering the highway, it added in a lane, and there was a semi truck coming, and there was no one else on the highway. It was completely dark. It was around midnight, and the semi truck was changing lanes, and he didn't see me. I was in this tiny little black, it was a sports car. The semi truck driver was switching lanes, and what ended up happening is that he wasn't switching into my lane, but he went a little over the line, and he ended up hitting my car right behind the driver's side door. And that ended up sending my car sideways. So I ended up going down the highway sideways, these 5-lane highways, and there was nobody on the road. And so that's why they say that I was lucky, right? It's crazy. This whole year, it was I was lucky with all of these terrible things that were happening. In that moment, looking up and seeing the headlight of the semi truck in my window, and I looked directly into that light, and I was like, I'm about to die. And it was this split second choice where I said to myself, if I'm going to die, I am going to fully embrace this moment. And so I accepted it. In accepting it, I took my hands off the steering wheel. I took my foot off the pedal, and I just allowed whatever was going to happen. And I gave thanks to God. And in that moment, my grandmother appeared to me. She was sitting in the passenger seat, and she put her arms around me. And the next thing that I remember is that my car was parked on the shoulder, and I was in shock. and the semi-truck driver had pulled in front of me, and I saw him running towards me, and he got to my window and he collapsed in tears and he said, "I thought I killed you. I'm so grateful you're not dead." And I was like, am I? I was like, I don't even know. It was like my airbag went off, my car was totaled. Nobody would let me get out of the car. So like there was a police car that ended up coming, and they were like checking me out, like looking at my eyes and everything. And I didn't even have whiplash. I got out of that car and I was like, I wasn't even sore. Most people when they get in car accidents, like, you do the whiplash thing, you're like, your whole body like aches, right? I didn't have any of that. I walked away from that car accident completely untouched. Near-death experience. It's unexplainable moment. Eventually, after I had moved down to the west side, and I was, in a stable place and everything, I met a group of artists, and it blew my mind. It was one of those things where I was like, I didn't know that this really existed. Like, I imagined it to the point where I was like, my whole life I was like, I just want to work in film. I want to like be around that like glamorous lifestyle. I want to be able to like create this world and that I'm envisioning. And everyone was like, but that's not really possible. Like, it's like bringing me back down to reality. Like, you're never gonna succeed doing that. So that's just a fantasy in your mind, right? And I just like, but I would get stuck because I was like, no, but I think that there's something there, right? And like there were times when people had these like salons and they would, just kind of brainstorm, what they were thinking about, and so I got really into like philosophy, and like Simone de Beauvoir was like one of my heroes, and I was like, no, this has to exist, right? Like I feel it so strongly. And one night I ended up meeting this group of artists, and they invited me back to their studio. And they had this practice where they would take a canvas, and then everyone would take turns one at a time, and you would pick a color intuitively. It was like the whole idea of it was like, don't think, don't use your ego, just intuitively do something, right? Paint something. And so each person, one at a time, would walk up to the canvas and they would pick a color, and then they would just flow with it as long as they needed to. But they were only allowed to touch with one color. And if you were the one who previously painted, you weren't allowed to say anything. So the next, like you weren't talking through this, right? It's like one person would like draw a shape or something like that. And then the next person would come, they would choose a different color, and then they would paint whatever they wanted. And so they could cover it, they could paint over any part of it, they could go along with it. It was just like, what do you think that this canvas needs? And it was so inspiring to me, but I was so terrified of picking up a brush. So it took me multiple times of going and hanging out, and I didn't tell anyone that I painted when I was little. I didn't tell anyone that this was like a dream. It was just like this like fear of mine of like, oh my gosh, like I want this so badly that I'm terrified of doing it. All through this time, even after I had gotten this divorce, my ex-husband would call me randomly. And because we had this like push-pull, like, relationship, I would always answer. And I started noticing, like, when he would call me, like, I would get this, like, sick feeling in my stomach. But I didn't know how to resist it yet. There was this one time that I had received a phone call from him, and it put me in a really, like, negative headspace. Like, I had all these voices that were coming back in, and I was, like, self-esteem went all the way down, and I think it was like the 4th of July or something. And I wandered over to the studios because I knew that they were hanging out doing something. That was the day that I picked up a brush. And I thought, I just quietly in a corner was like, I'm just going to paint something. And I don't even remember what I painted. And then that kind of gave me a little bit of confidence. So when they started doing this, this egoless painting, I very timidly asked if I could have a turn. When I got up there, I couldn't put my brush down. I needed to paint, and it was noticed. And someone came up to me and they said, wow, you're really good. Like, you holding a paintbrush comes very naturally. And I was sort of like shocked because I'd never heard that before. And I was like, whoa, like this is coming from a real artist. And so it took me a little while, but I kept going, and I kept pushing myself. And the more that I did that, the more that I went, the more that I painted, the more that they accepted me and encouraged me. And then at one point, one of them came up to me and he said, I think you're a better artist than I am. And I almost didn't even know how to take that, because I had never been expressed to like that. And it opened my world. It helped me accept that part of myself that was like screaming to get out, where I was like, I knew that there was something here, but it was the people around me that were preventing me from expressing myself, from being who I am. On Halloween night of 2015, I was dressed like Harley Quinn, and my boss invited us to a party in the Venice canals. There was this jacket that caught my eye of this guy who walked into the party, and I walked right up to him because I was so interested in this jacket. He had made it himself, and then that caused me to be even more like, oh my gosh, how did you put this together? And we ended up talking the entire night. He was like, I'm a screen print artist. These are some of the things that I do. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've always wanted to learn how to screen print. Tell me everything. So we sat and he just explained the process of screen printing the entire night. And I was just really enveloped in this. I hadn't thought much about my outfit. There were no pockets. I was dressed a little like scantily. And so I didn't have my phone. So I asked him if he could write his number on my arm. And I was like, I'm definitely going to call you. I want to learn how to do this. And he was like, yeah, anytime, like come to my studio. He's like, in fact, I'm actually painting a mural in a couple days. If you want to come, like assist me, maybe we get to know each other, kind of a thing. And I was like, yes, I'm there. Right. And so I walk away from this conversation being like super enthused, very inspired. While I was in that conversation, there were like a lot of other things that were happening with this friend of mine. And one of those things was a big portion of jealousy. He was, trying to be more than friends, and I knew that was not the thing. And so I was resisting that, but still trying to be friends. And so he got very jealous that night that I was talking to someone else. And at another point in the night, I guess we were leaving, and some guy made some comment, and my friend like threw him up against a wall, and it was very shocking to me. And I was just like, I need to get out of here. And so we all took an Uber back. All of my stuff was at his house, his apartment. And so we all took an Uber back. He hopped out of the Uber really quickly. And then I sort of followed behind him, not really thinking much of it, but I knew he was upset with me. And I was just like, I got to get my stuff and get out of here before things get too ugly. So I go up to his door. He had beat me there. He locked the door. I didn't have my keys. He had my cell phone, my backpack with, all my stuff in it. And so I banged on his door, and I was like, hey, like, I need to get my stuff. And he just screamed out the door, like, go away. And I was like, no, 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 no. This is not how it's going to go. So I reinforced it and I banged on his door. And he flung open the door and he just started punching me as hard as he could. And it was my face, the back of my head, the front of my face. And somehow I was holding on to the door frame. And so through all of this, I was still standing. And he finished punching me and I was holding on, and I looked at him directly in the eyes and I said, you can hit me as many times as you want. I'm not leaving until you give me my bag. Because I was standing up for myself in the face, directly in the face of somebody who is actively being violent towards me, for really no reason other than, his own projection of whatever he thought was supposed to happen. And so he turned around, he grabbed my bag, and he threw it past me. It landed on the sidewalk. Everything fell out of it. I turned around, grabbed my bag as quick as I could, threw everything in it, and I just started booking it down the street. And as soon as I got to the corner, I turned around just to look. And to my horror, he was coming after me. And in that moment, I was like, I need to document this. And I took out my phone and I took a selfie. And my face was completely crying. I had makeup on. It was smeared. I was such a mess. It was 3 a.m. There was nobody on the streets. This is right off Abbott Kinney. And I was so terrified. He came after me, and I dug into my bag for something, anything. And what came to my hand was a hunting knife that was given to me on my 29th birthday, so in 2014. And I grabbed it, pulled it out of its sheath, and that was my protection. He finally caught up with me. He grabbed me by the shoulder, spun me around, and he was trying to apologize to me. And I was not having it. And I pulled the knife on his neck. I had it, within inches of his neck. I am capable of killing somebody right now. And if this guy does not leave me alone, I will absolutely kill him. There was no doubt in my mind I was about to kill somebody. At that moment, I blacked out. The next thing I remember is that I was walking down Venice Boulevard holding a knife, crying, and I didn't know. I really thought that I killed this guy. And it wasn't until later, I ended up going to court. I got a restraining order. And in court, it came out, he told the judge that I lunged at him. I ended up going to the hospital. I had a deviated septum. So the next day I ended up calling this new friend of mine who was going to teach me how to screen print. He was downtown LA, painting this mural at a screen print shop, actually, and was able to show me the entire process of screen printing, of mural making. When I showed up, he was immediately, he was like, man, what was up with that guy? It was too complicated for me to not say anything. And when I explained it to him, I completely broke down. He took me under his wing, and taught me how to screen print, taught me everything he knew. So when he was teaching me how to screen print, the first thing he said is, you need to bring with you a few pictures, black and white images, that you think you might want to screen print. And having come off that Halloween night, I had these selfies. I had 3 selfies from that night, and then a 4th selfie that I thought was kind of went along with everything. And so I ended up taking these 4 selfies and creating my very first piece. And so while he was teaching me how to print, he was also filling my mind with the history of propaganda. And especially from World War I and World War II, where he explained that these posters, these things that were screen printed, then if you distribute it enough and you put it up enough, then people will start believing it to be true. And so he was breaking apart these ideas of propaganda and posters and images for me, And I was like, I need a motif. I need something that's going to represent what I'm trying to put out in the world. And it just clicked in a way where I was like, strawberries look like hearts and they have their seeds on the outside. And so maybe that could be something that would be representative of love. And maybe I could throw this love out into the world as something that becomes what I'm trying to pursue. Thanksgiving of 2015, and I had finished this huge piece that I felt very, very proud of. It was like my masterpiece. It was 4 feet by 4 feet, and I was circling around this idea of like what society or like how society puts appearances on us, especially as women. And I was thinking about like, what is like the most grotesque image that I could maybe come up with that would also be like seductive and would also be like very natural and beautiful, depending on where your thought process was. I was very much into this, like this theory with my paintings of like painting things that people thought were grotesque, but bringing it to them in a way that they would think that it's beautiful. And so I depicted a very large woman with a very big belly, and she's like grabbing her belly without, any sort of like thoughts on being looked at. And she was eating a strawberry, and then I printed strawberries around her. So it almost felt like she was like emerging out of the strawberries, but then she was also eating a strawberry, and she was like not afraid of being told that she was fat or ugly or anything like that. And she was just like, had no care whatsoever that other people were looking at her. And it was like, she was like becoming a strawberry. And it was like, I was really into it. And I was getting a lot of praise in that like art community, and I was very proud of it. And then came the phone call, right? My ex-husband called me, and it was like kind of the same old thing where it was like, well, what are you even doing? Like, our divorce never went through. I never signed the paperwork. We're still married. Like, why aren't you just gonna come home? Like, we're soulmates. He's like, stop this nonsense. You're never going to make it big. Just kind of like the stream of things that he was saying to me. I had built myself up enough to know that I had something, that there was real talent there, and that I wanted to pursue it. I was so proud of this painting. And some part of me, I guess, wanted some sort of validation from this person who was not kind. And I just wanted him to see me for once. And so I sent him a picture of this painting. And I said, I'm so proud of this. Look at how beautiful. I'm doing it. I'm doing the things you said I could never do. And he got the picture and he said, that is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. He's like, not a single person would ever want to put that on their wall. It was so grotesque. He's like, what would possess you to paint something that disgusting? And I said, I think it's beautiful. And I said, and I found a group of artists and they believe in me. And I think I'm going to pursue that. And he was like, that's just propaganda. And I said, you're right. It is. It's strawberry propaganda. I proudly stood up for one of my creations to somebody who couldn't see who I was. So I give you that whole backstory. I will say now that I am a mother and I'm raising a child, one of the most important things for me to pass on to him is for him to listen to himself, for him to know who he is and why he's making the choices that he did. And I think that was something that I was never taught. I had to give that to myself. I think that it's really important for us all to digest our own stories, first of all, and to come to a place of acceptance and knowing you might not have made the best choices. You might not have done the greatest things in your life, and yet you making those choices and doing those things has led you to where you are. And if we can accept those things about ourselves, that is one of the greatest acts of love. And it is to ourself. Self-love is in my opinion, the most honorable place to start when it comes to learning about love. And it wasn't where I started, but I've learned a lot. I can tell you that. The origin story of Strawberry Propaganda is about flipping the negative messaging and making it about love. And if you put love into the world and never give up, you will find it too.